Well, I would say, is atheism a thought? Is it invented by human beings? Because if you're going to simply throw out the idea that, oh, your belief, and this is typically what happens, the critic will say, well, God is just a psychological idea, a psychological crutch to help you to get through the difficult spots in life, through those crisis times. And so people like Ludwig Feuerbach and Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud, they were ones who talked about this kind of the psychoanalytical idea that this is why you believe in God. You can't handle real life, and so you need to cling to something intangible beyond yourself. But where's the proof of that? Well, they will dismiss God because of the alleged origin of the idea, but that says nothing about the rationality of belief in God. They're simply talking about the psychology of belief, and we can do just the same to those who are atheists. Why are you an atheist? Maybe you don't want to have a father figure, a God figure, an authority figure in your life. The sword cuts both ways. So if you want to play that game, the theist could play it just as well as the critic can, but it doesn't prove a point. It commits the genetic fallacy that the truth or falsity of something is the case because of its origin. So that's I think that's just specious, false argumentation. But what if we turned that on its head? What if we said, and sometimes people will say this about genetics too, we can apply it to the realm of, human beings seem to be wired to believe in God. They talk about the God gene, or human beings being wired. They have what's called this hyperactive, design detection device that we've got. This agency detection device that we've got, that we can detect design, that we can detect action, that we just seem to be wired. So when there's a noise going on in the house at night, well, your immediate thought isn't, oh, maybe the wall was a little weak and something fell down. You think, oh, there's an intruder in the house. There's an agent in the house. And so that's how, so many people who are doing this cognitive science of religion will say, that's just something that is kind of genetically wired into you and then reinforced through culture and so forth. But I would say in both cases, it doesn't disprove God, but rather it could actually be a reinforcement for the legitimacy of belief in God. If you turn that around and say, well, what if there is a God who exists and we have in us a deep longing for something transcendent, for something beyond ourselves? Could it be the case that God has precisely wired us so that belief in him would be would be easier? And the same thing that we've been biologically wired to believe in God. And there have been studies from all around the world that children, even apart from whatever their cultural background is, before they've been maybe gone to school or to university and so forth, they believe that there's some sort of a superhero figure, some sort of a designer, some sort of a power independent of us. And this is something that is not just Western. It is something that has been done in different parts of the world through Oxford University and Justin Barrett, who's been the researcher heading up this project. So it's been very, very interesting to see that God is making belief easier for human beings because this is how we're wired. And as St. Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. So as we look at this question of the psychology of religion, it doesn't have to be seen as something that detracts from belief in God, but rather can be seen as reinforcing belief in God, that we actually are made for God. We are wired to have that, as Blaise Pascal, the philosopher, said, to have that God-shaped vacuum within us filled by that being. I mean, we have, human beings are, as Bertrand Russell said, that they're incorrigibly religious, that they are, that they cannot get away from kind of this religious impulse to lean on something, to look to something beyond themselves and so forth. Well, it makes sense if there is a God, that this would fit very nicely, that it would dovetail. So we don't have to pit the idea that we seem to be wired for God or have an emptiness and a longing for God on the one hand, and God's existence, that these are somehow opposed to each other, actually we can see them as coming together very beautifully. So the problem with the atheist is that if it's true that we feel wired for God, that we find security and significance in this idea of God, therefore God must not exist. And of course, that simply does not follow, any more so than a person who doesn't want God to exist makes God non-existent. So those are some thoughts on that. But I think it's also important to actually look at some of these world's leading atheists. And it's not to play this game of, I know what your motivations are, therefore your worldview must be wrong, but rather to point out the fact that because many leading atheists in the world, kind of the hall of fame, if you will, of atheists, from Marx and Nietzsche and Bertrand Russell, all the way up until the new atheists like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, have all had negative to non-existent relationships with their fathers or father substitutes. And so what seems to be happening, and Paul Vitz has written about this in a book called Faith of the Fatherless, taught psychology at New York University. And he did a study of all of these atheists, and there seemed to be a deep connection between a lack or failure of the father figure and their inclination toward atheism. And you can see this, that if my earthly father or father substitute has let me down, has brought shame to the family, has maybe died, like Daniel Dennett's father died in a plane crash when he was 4 years of age, that this has a profound impact. And so people will judge the merits of the Heavenly Father based on the merits of their earthly father, or even any sort of relationship or non-existent relationship that they've had with that father. But that exactly reverses things. What we should do is look to the greater heavenly model by which we judge the worthiness of our earthly fathers, that God is the one, as Ephesians 3 says, God is the one who is the model for fatherhood for all of the families of the earth. And so this is what we need to be keeping in mind. And I think that you can see how this psychology might work, that people will dismiss God, not because of so much intellectual reasons. I mean, they will bring those reasons perhaps, and we should look at them and examine them and so forth. But I suspect, as I talk to atheists, sometimes when they're very angry, I want to know what's behind their anger, why they're hostile to the idea of God, to church and so forth. Some things perhaps gone wrong. And so I'm not saying that this is true for all atheists, but I'm saying the ones who really have a strong edge, a hostility and so forth, I want to try to get to the bottom of that and first find out what their story has been, and that maybe even in talking about their story, this will help them to see, maybe some of my reasons for rejecting God aren't so much rational or intellectual, but perhaps more emotional, psychological, and so on.